Public school infrastructure problems have been a long-standing challenge within the country's basic education sector. Despite this being the case, the Basic Education Department recently proposed new changes to the norms and standards for public school infrastructure. But education lobby group Equal Education has slammed the move. It says the proposed changes are drastic, unacceptable, and undermine the right to basic education. So let's unpack this now with Equal Education's General Secretary, Noncedo Matubetube. Noncedo, thank you so much for your time this evening. I mean, just one of the changes here is around the deadlines that government must look at in terms of being rid of pit latrines, provide basics such as water, electricities and classrooms and the like. But talk to us a little bit about just some of those amendments that we could be anticipating on behalf of the Basic Education Department.
So the most serious one that we want to talk about really that is going to impact school communities across the country is in fact around the termination of deadlines to the law for school infrastructure. What that means for school communities, it means that in the current socioeconomic crisis, in the current crisis around building of a capable state, a government that in fact delivers schools, we no longer will have a law or a tongue or tool or an instrument to make sure that government is in fact adhering to deadlines to address the massive backlog around school infrastructure. And the people we've spoken to, Equal Education members, affected school communities, are most concerned about this because that's the most tangible equalizing factor in a very two-tier and unequal education system. So that's a big one that I think school communities across the board must be aware of. We do need, in fact, those deadlines because it makes sure that when you don't have a school that has adequate classrooms, when you still have a school that has no access to electricity or water security, you're able to say the department and government is absolutely compelled by law to make sure that your school, in fact, by 2016, in fact, has appropriate infrastructure that is conducive for teaching and learning. There are three other parts of the amendment that we are concerned about. The other is that the Department of Basic Education then reintroduces what we have called an escape clause, something that says the Department of Education will in fact fix schools where it is able to, respectfully able to, meaning that they will need cooperation from another government entity. This could be ESCOM, the Department of Water and Sanitation. This could be Departments of Public Works and Infrastructure in various provinces. Now, before we had this amendment to the school law, in 2018, Equal Education was in court with the Department of Education. And we were saying to the department, the school infrastructure law as it stands is inadequate. One of the things that needs to be fixed around it is the fact that it has an escape clause. It says you will do this thing where applicable or where you can. But there isn't a compulsion to make sure that it is absolutely done. And so they've reintroduced this clause, which we feel is in breach of that court judgment and in fact a direct infringement on the right to education for especially marginalized and Black learners across this country.
You know, as you're speaking about this, one has to wonder, Noncedo, if there had been any form of justification or even communication following these amendments that was given on behalf of the Department of Basic Education. You're right. This has been an ongoing conversation for decades on end regarding infrastructure, adequate infrastructure being present in schools, public schools. And unfortunately, we still have public schools that have got pit toilets. I don't know how we can justify it in a democratic dispensation in 2022, but here we are. We've got it. Has the department come out and said, guys, this is why we've had to institute these amendments?
So one of the worrying things, this is the other two things about the amendment that bother us. The one is that the language used and the format used for this amendment cannot be understood easily by school communities, never mind the legal comrades or lawyer comrades that we work with. And so it's inaccessible to communities. And that in itself is void of the compulsion of state to bring the public along when it amends and adjusts laws progressively in their favor. So that's the one thing we're already very cautious of. The second is exactly what you speak of. We found out about the amendment to the school infrastructure law through a media request and a media query from a media house that had picked up that this amendment had in fact been gazetted. It is not on the Department of Basic Education's websites, on provincial education websites, departments. It isn't with PMG. It isn't on any of their social media platforms. It's been snuck through just on the eve of schools closing. To us, this means that the department doesn't care about engaging affected communities around a big amendment that affects school infrastructure, which is a massive, massive crisis. And South Africa will remember that these are one of the things that we were deeply concerned about collectively as a country as we were approaching and dealing with the COVID pandemic. And that reality hasn't shifted. If anything, it's worsened. And so amending and changing a law like this should absolutely compel government to make sure that there is an effort to make sure that the civil society, actors in the education space, school governing bodies, parents, learners themselves are given adequate time to amend and suggest proposals to this amendment. So one of the things we are calling for, and we're asking South Africans to support us, is an extension for public comment on this amendment. At the moment, the deadline is the 10th of July, and we've asked the department to at least consider the 31st of July. And we do invite South Africans to please join us in this call for an extension.
Yeah, I think more than anything else, I think that it's about educating South Africans about how exactly their children, as well as the schools, will be affected should this amendment actually pass. So let's speak a little bit to how is it that one can perhaps even challenge or demand greater accountability on these amendments. As you're saying that it was not something that was communicated openly. It almost appeared as though it was something that was done so that the public does not notice. Now that we have noticed, how do we challenge or even demand some kind of accountability on behalf of the department?
There are three ways that you can support this call. So Equal Education and a few other organizations in the education space are working together to write to the Department of Education to request this extension to at least the 31st of July. People that have the capacity where they sit, please write to your provincial and the National Department of Education to support this ask for an extension if you're an interested party. If not, please contact Equal Education on all of our social media platforms. We are on everything short of TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Find us and we'll help you write a submission that requests this extension. We are also looking to support organizations, schools, parents, learners that are wanting to write submissions themselves that reflect on this amendment to the policy, or to the law rather. Those folks can contact us too. We can help with the writing of that submission. We are putting out a petition through the change.org platform for those that support our submission for the changes around this amendment. The biggest thing we're calling for, we cannot have a law that is void of timelines and deadline. In our efforts to build a capable state and a strong education system, we must be able to hold government accountable. So if the law says we need adequate classrooms in all schools by the year 2020, that in fact must happen. And if not, we must push and put pressure on government for accountability and transparency around why those deadlines have not been met and who else in our eco space. Business must come on board. The private sector must support government, different entities. The president must, in fact, not just prioritize school infrastructure by mouth, but really walk his talk as well in making sure that there's a full eradication of plain pit latrines by the end of this year.